Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Tony Robles. Welcome to Listen and Be Heard Radio. The subject of pain. Whenever I think of that subject, I recall a song that was sung by Johnny Cash, and I think it was written by Nine Inch Nails. It's a song called Hurt. And the lines are haunting, yet they're poignant. And they are as follows. I hurt myself today to see if I still feel. I focus on the pain, the only thing that's real. Our guest today is a wonderful author who has written a wonderful book, a book titled Nervous: Essays on Heritage and Healing. Jen Soriano is an author who lives in Seattle, Washington. I am going to read from her bio. She's a writer and movement builder who has long worked at the intersection of grassroots organizing, narrative strategy, and art-driven social change. She has won the Penelope C. Niven Prize for Creative Nonfiction, the Fugue, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, the Fugue Prose Prize and fellowships from Hugo House, Vermont Studio Center, Artist Trust, and Jack Jones Literary Arts. She has done a lot of performing, and she's an independent scholar and a performer, author of the chapbook called Making the Tongue Dry, which I love that title. She received her BA in History and Science from Harvard University and an MFA in Fiction and Nonfiction from the Rainier Writing Workshop. Originally from a landlocked part of the Chicago area, Jen Soriano now lives with her family in Seattle near the Duwamish River and the Salish Sea. Uh, Warm welcome to Jen Soriano. Welcome to Listen and Be Heard Radio.
Thank you, Tony. I am so happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Well, the title of the book, Nervous, it kind of struck a chord with me because I tend to be a little on the anxious side. I was reading from the author's note where you write that the book is a work of nonfiction, but also a work of memory. Uh, how does, well, let me ask you this. Were you going for a memoir? Because this book is a book of essays. Were you going for a memoir initially? How did it turn into a book of essays?
Great question. So for anybody out there who's a writer, you'll know that sometimes it takes, speaking of pain, several painful drafts to figure out
Right,
exactly
right.
where you're going.
Yeah.
And when I first started this book, my first draft was actually a memoir. It was like, what you think of when you think of a conventional memoir, like a start, finish, kind of like a whole through line to the story. And it didn't end up that way because when I started shopping around my first draft, I got a lot of feedback that it would be better as essays.
Yeah.
And once I got that feedback, I was really relieved. I was like, oh, thank God, because I think I'm a better essayist than I am a sort of traditional narrative writer. And to be honest, there's a pretty important piece to why, right? It's partly skills, but it's also because I didn't necessarily have all the information I needed to write like a really detailed beginning, middle, and end type
Mm,
memoir,
mm,
because it's not just my story, it's a story of my parents, it's a story of my grandparents. And as is, I think, really common in Filipino culture and really any culture that has experienced a lot of oppression, there's a lot of history that's been erased. And so there were places where there were just gaps and silence as opposed to, sentences that I could write to fill out a complete memoir. And so I ended up turning it into essays because that allowed me to focus on what was kind of like, oh, this is some really cool topics that I want to write about,
Yeah.
like chronic pain, like transgenerational trauma, like pregnancy, childhood neglect, parenting with trauma. And so then I got to organize the personal stories around those topics instead of trying to have like the complete story of three generations in what would be a more conventional memoir.
Yeah, that's interesting because again, the process of that, um, you know, I guess can be daunting, the process of trying to write a complete memoir. Uh, I know in the description, the essays are described, or at least some of them are described as being lyrical.
Mm.
Can you talk about, lyrical essay? Because, there are people that are very much interested in that, but may not know how to go about actually, putting one together or pursuing one.
Well, one thing I like to say about lyric essays is that kind of the secret behind them, I think, is actually uh, just letting yourself go a little bit buck wild with your writing. So as opposed to there being sort of like rules to the essay, it's almost like the opposite. It's like
Yeah.
actually, if you want to write a lyric essay, then you get to unlearn the rules that we got taught in school about how you write an essay, topic sentence, support the topic sentence, have an argument, then have a summary and conclusion, and make sure everything is like left justified with like a tab, right? That's composition class type essay writing. And to me, lyric essays, just in their most basic and beautiful form, are whatever it is that you want to write that doesn't necessarily follow those rules. And I was really lucky to get to go to an awesome MFA program called the Rainier Writing Workshop. And one of the founders of Rainier Writing Workshop was a lyric essayist whose name was Judith Kitchen. And she wrote something about the lyric essay that, beyond what I just said about it, really resonated with me, which is that if you want to have lyric in your essay, there has to be a lyre. And lyre, not like someone who lies, but lyre like the musical instrument.
Okay,
Which I
okay.
think is that don't quote me on this, y'all can Google fact check it, but I think it's the instrument that, cherubs hold
I
that looks
think
like a
so.
harp.
I think so. Yeah, liar, and that would be Lyre. Is that
Right. Uh-huh.
Lyre? You know what? Let me
Yeah.
pause this. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Tony Robles, and this is Listen and Be Heard Radio. The subject of pain is one that we have all kind of breached at one point or another. When I think of pain, I think of that song that Johnny Cash did a few years ago before he died. It was a song called Hurt that was written by, I think it was Nine Inch Nails. And the lyrics have always stayed with me because I found that they were very poignant and very deep. And they are as follows. I hurt myself today to see if I still feel. I focus on the pain, the only thing that's real. Jen Soriano is a writer who has written a wonderful new book on the subject of pain and how it applies to our lives and it's all in all of its complexities. Nervous is the name of the book, uh, and Nervous is a collection of essays on heritage and healing. And I'm just going to read from her bio. Jen Soriano is a writer and movement builder who has long worked at the intersection of grassroots organizing, narrative strategy, and art-driven social change. She has won the Penelope C. Niven Prize for Creative Nonfiction, the Fugue Prose Prize, and fellowships from Hugo House, Vermont Studio Center, Artist Trust, and Jack Jones Literary Arts. She is also an independent scholar and performer and author of the chapbook called Making the Tongue Dry. Let's see, she received her BA in History and Science from Harvard University and an MFA in Fiction and Nonfiction from the Rainier Writing Workshop. She's originally from a landlocked part of the Chicago area and now lives with her family in Seattle near the Duwamish River and the Salish Sea. Um, Warm welcome to you, Jen Soriano, uh, the author of Nervous. Thank you for being on our program.
Thanks for having me on, Tony. It's great to be here. Thanks for
Hey,
the invite.
I wanted to you start by asking, this is a book of essays on the subject of pain and trauma and all of the different layers of complexity that goes into that and how you've dealt with it. Um, you know, were you initially drawn to making it an essay collection? How did that evolve?
So I had actually initially written a memoir, and a memoir that was not in essays, a memoir that was in chapters, and was what, a lot of people think of when they think of memoir, so a more conventional narrative with beginning, middle, end. And and I started getting feedback after my first draft that people thought it might work better as essays. And and I was really relieved to hear that because I think I'm actually a better essay writer than I am a conventional narrative writer. And part of that is just the way that I think. I think in fragments and kind of like flashes, as opposed to just kind of these straight stories. But then also the other piece of it is that the book tells personal stories that are about myself, but also about my parents and about my grandparents, right? So it's this multi-generational kind of memoir. And there's a lot that I didn't know about my parents' story and also about my grandparents' story. And part of that is because of this sort of learned silence that I talk about breaking in the book. And, the other part of it is that it's unfortunately really common for cultures like Filipino culture and other cultures that have been subjected to long-standing oppression, that our histories have been erased, right? So there's just like a lot of context that I couldn't put into this traditional narrative. And so there are a lot of gaps and there are a lot of holes. And so then turning the book into essays actually solved that problem in a way because I got to actually embrace those gaps and and explore them as opposed to feeling like I needed to fill them in. And then I got to organize the personal stories around, cool topics to write about that I always knew that I had wanted to write about, like chronic pain and the connection between colonization and trauma, parenting with trauma, for example, and other things.
Is the essay form, could we assume that it might lend itself to being a little bit more liberating? It allows more latitude in that you can dive more into speculation
I think so. I
somehow.
mean, I think,
Yeah.
there's actually a book that's out right now that's on my list to read that's a speculative memoir.
Mm,
Um, and I want to read that because I want to see what that's like. It's called, I think, I'm going to figure it out before the end of our talk, so that folks, so listeners can check it out as well. But I do think personally that for me, that the essay form does allow a lot more latitude
yeah.
for speculation, for filling in kind of imagination, and for exploring questions, and not necessarily coming to the final answer, but sometimes asking more questions by
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
end. Uh, and uh, and yeah, and I mean, I also think that for the type of book that I was trying to write, which was not just about, hey, here's the story of my family, but was also trying to bring in research. So history and science research on the neuroscience of healing, histories of the Philippines that are actually really hard to find in just one place in books here in the United States. So the essay form just allowed me to be able to play with different ways of bringing all that information together. Like
Y-
I thought about the whole book more like a music album.
Oh, right,
with
right,
like different
yeah,
types of tracks, you know, you can
yeah,
kind of have different tones and different types
yeah,
of songs
yeah.
in a essay collection.
No, that's it. That's interesting. Yeah, the approach of uh, like a record album where
Hmm.
there's the ebbs and flows and different things. It's funny because I come out of the Vermont MFA program. I graduated from
Mm,
that, and one of the things we learned was about the different types of exposition. That being the high exposition, the exposition of secrets, the exposition of speculation. And your book really kind of captures all three of those types of exposition. Um,
mm,
there was a part in the book that you know I was really drawn to. It was I think you were in a surgical situation with your father. Now he was a neurosurgeon, is that correct?
hmm. That's right. Hmm.
And he worked in Chicago, and I guess he worked around a lot of people that had traumatic brain or head injuries. And you were there as an observer, observing your father in his work. Um, can you talk about the relationship you have with pain, of course, because that's a big part of the book, your own relationship with pain and the relationship that you had with your late father, because they seem to be interconnected in a multitude of ways.
Mm, thanks for that question.
You know?
Yes, they are definitely interconnected, and as I figured out through the process of writing the book, it also my experience with pain is also really interconnected with a larger experience of my parents' larger experience of migration, and I think in particular migration from a place that has such a history of um, honestly a lot of war and resistance to war, right? So, first I'll say that that quote that you read in the beginning of the program is a great quote, uh, because I've come to a place in terms of understanding my relationship with the pain where I actually feel grateful for it. And the reason
Hmm.
that I do is because I now realize that my pain was a symptom of my body telling me that it was still alive and could feel, right?
Mm,
And that is a
yeah,
good sign. You're
yeah.
alive. You're still alive. So my relationship to pain has been very much from a survivor mentality, right? As in, yeah, the bar is low in terms of what we're seeing as good news here, right? But in the same token, by the same token, it's like, well, what a gift of resilience and sort of appreciation of life also comes out of that kind of history of trauma, right? Where you're just glad that you've survived, right? So I think that I inherited some of that survivor relationship to pain from directly from my father, as
Hmm.
well as my mother, as well as my ancestors. As so many of our ancestors have had to go through so much just to survive, to make sure that we could even be here today. And so writing the book has really helped me arrive at that kind of appreciation for pain. Um, and I also start out my book with an epigraph from a neuroscientist named Stephen Porges, and the epigraph says, "Our nervous systems are trying to do the right thing." So what I mean by that, and using that as an epigraph, is that I've really learned that our nervous systems are designed to help us survive, and pain response is one of those ways that it happens, right? It's like it tells you that something needs to change. And with chronic pain, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to heal a broken ankle, or in my dad's case with the people that he had to operate on, it's like, well, you're in pain because literally you had a bullet shard in your head, and we need to fix that through surgery. So it's not like that's not the type of thing that needs to be healed with chronic pain. But with chronic pain, what I realized through this journey of writing the book is that there can be, and in my case, there was pretty deep psychological and emotional wounds that needed
Yeah.
to be healed, right? And that's what the pain was directing my attention to. And I'm so thankful for that because I've been able to really do a lot of connective and community-based healing because of it.
All this talk about pain, it makes me automatically think of Dostoevsky. I just default to Dostoevsky. He said pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart. And
Wow.
anybody that's ever read Notes from Underground, you read that first paragraph, you just think to yourself, "Man, this guy must have been in a lot must have been in a lot of pain."
Life, yeah, and life of the party.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you too, pain, being paired with that and having so many different diagnoses of pain and how it manifested itself in your own body. Um, I wanted to know as an artist, right, if pain in itself is a collaborator. Because I believe that, as artists, like, when I was writing the book about the thrift store, felt like I was in collaboration with the people that were there, because without them, I
Mhm.
wouldn't have been able to write it. Has pain been a collaborator for better or worse? Has pain been a collaborator for you as in your journey as an artist? And if so, how do you collaborate with it towards healing?
God, what a great question. I've never heard anybody ask it that way.
Yeah.
That is such an artistic way of asking it. And yeah, actually, the short answer is yes.
Yeah.
Pain has absolutely been a collaborator. I mean, I write about pain in the book as a character in a lot of different ways because that is how pain has showed up in my life, almost like personified, right? I mean,
Wow.
in with the first essay, I read about how I broke up with a long term, person that I was in a relationship with because actually pain
Yeah,
was my primary
I
relationship.
remember reading yeah, I remember reading that in the book. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
really, pain was like that's what I was giving all my time to and all my thoughts and energy and and my money also. Um, and so, I think that before writing the book, I might have said that pain was a dysfunctional collaborator.
Mhm.
But like I said, right, that, with 8 years of writing the book, which coincided with 8 years of different types of healing therapies and community work and collective and self-care, has led me to look at it differently, which is that I think pain has been the collaborator, or I should say, I'm gonna put my own agency into it. I think I have turned pain into the collaborator that I needed to be able to share some of the larger lessons that I've learned in the process of healing with others. And I mean, I think all artists feel some kind of um, urge, or like flame or like compulsion, right?
Yeah.
To do their art for some reason. And pain has been one of my strongest drivers, for better or for worse. I mean, I'd be up, 3 nights in a row, not being able to sleep because of pain. And so what would I do? I mean, yeah, I'd binge some Netflix, but then I would also write. And in a lot of ways, I think has been um, the muse.
You also mentioned in the book the approaches of, I guess, clinicians as being, very clinical and impersonal, and you felt in large measure that what you were going through was kind of downplayed or diminished. Um, but also you say that there can be a different way of looking at pain and people that are suffering with it, uh, looking at things from a metaphorical standpoint as opposed to something rigid and like a boilerplate type approach. I thought that that was really interesting. Can you speak on that? Because I hope I'm articulating that correctly, because that's what I kind of took from that particular chapter. And being a
Hmm.
poet myself, and my whole life is one metaphor after the other. When you brought
Hmm.
that up, I just thought that was I thought that was very important and
Yeah.
something worth discussing.
Yeah. So I think it's a couple things. Number one, I say or I write a piece about how what if we looked at pain not as a sign of weakness, which I think is pretty much the dominant way that we look at pain in our society, and that's very gendered as well, right? That to show any signs of like pain is to show that you're not strong enough to tough it out. So what if we changed that way of looking at pain and instead looked at it in the way that it actually biologically exists, which is as a sign that something is needed, something needs to change, right? And
Yeah.
so, um, in that way, I think I did want to kind of cast pain um, as an indicator of of what it might be wrong, not just with not with ourselves, right? Sort of not the individual disease model, but what might be wrong in our societies that we need to change in order to stop the pain from the outside in and not just from the inside out and not just to numb it, right? With a pill. Um, and the other thing then is around the other metaphors, right? So in the book, I I share these metaphors through which I've started to view both pain and trauma, and particularly transgenerational trauma. And the primary metaphor is thinking about the nervous system as a system of waterways, right? So like the watersheds that are all around us, like rivers connected to lakes, connected to mountain streams, connected to oceans and bays.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was one of the main metaphors that helped me in my healing process. There's a trauma recovery framework that was developed by Judith Herman, in which one of the steps of trauma recovery is retelling your narrative. And so for me, one of the key parts of reshaping my narrative around pain was being able to view it through the point of view of something that was fluid, like a system of waterways, as opposed to something that was like rigid, which is how people used to think about the nervous system, like a system of railroads, where nothing was going to change. You're just either working or you're broken, right? But with the metaphor of waterways, then all of a sudden, I had a way to think about my pain as something that wasn't static and wasn't set in stone, but that was responsive to my environment, right? Like the way that a river might get um, polluted because of, factories dumping
Mm,
waste into the water. But then that can also be reclaimed, that water can be reclaimed through changes in our environment. And that's the basis of the whole neuroscientific principle of plasticity, which is relatively new. And that's the fact now. Before it was a theory. Now it's a fact that our nervous systems can change, and they can actually change fairly rapidly through not such huge interventions. Like you don't have to pay for expensive pills. You don't have to have expensive surgery. It changes through practice, and it changes through relationships with others and relationships with our environment.
it's very beautiful and really telling the metaphor of the waterways and the watersheds, um, and how these things are fluid and how that metaphorically you're illustrating the interconnectedness of things, that things aren't just, sitting in isolation. It actually
Right.
kind of reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if you're familiar with Wendell Berry. He,
A little bit.
Wendell, where he talks about a road as opposed to a path.
Mm.
So, road is a man-made thing, which is an imposition, which uh, sees, the things. A road sees nature as something that's in the way, right? So it doesn't go with the natural curvature. it imposes itself to avoid everything natural. Whereas a path is a natural phenomenon that people like mostly like native people will take that not to impose itself, but to be a part of what it is, you know.
I
So
love that.
so yeah, because I was reading your book and his book at the same time, and I was thinking, wow, this whole thing about the path reminded me of kind of like the metaphor that you were, or the analogy that you were making with the water. The other
Absolutely.
thing that really touched me about your book too is that, you wrote that our bodies are archives of not just our lived experiences, but of our ancestors as well. And then you wrote of your Lola Simeona, is that
Yeah.
Lola Simeona, in your book, and the trauma of World War II that she experienced firsthand, which is, another kind of pain, having lost her husband. And can you, can you maybe share a little bit about your relationship with her and maybe how it helped you deal with some of the pain?
Absolutely. These are great questions. So, my Lola Simeona was the only grandparent that I ever knew. And I feel really lucky that I got to know her. She lived a pretty long life. She lived until she was 88. And so she didn't die until I was already an adult. I was, already, I think 19 or 20
Mm,
when she passed away. And so I had the good fortune of being able to get to know her. Over those years, although she lived in the Philippines and we were in the US. She had the means to travel and would come and visit us maybe once every 3 or 4 years. And we would go and visit her in the in-between times. And I always felt really close to her. Frankly, I felt closer to her than I did to my own mother. And, I think it's just like any kind of human relationship thing,
yeah.
sometimes it just clicks. And we just clicked. I clicked with my Lola. Even though, to some people she was kind of a scary person. She was just, she was a no nonsense, a self-made woman, like never made it past the second grade, but she took care of business, Um, and she raised, a family of four, pretty much all by herself. Um, and she was always an example of strength to me, strength in my matrilineal lineage, and also of caring and nurturing because she was also so sweet. I mean, she would like sing me to sleep and run her fingers through my hair. And she whenever she came from the Philippines, she'd open up her suitcase and like and there's just always goodies, So I was like,
Oh
where's the
yeah.
pastillas?
Oh
And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
just like such good memories of the pasalubong and the
Mm,
smells from the Philippines. And
oh yeah.
so, her example and her story, as well as the stories that she shared with me about my grandfather, her first husband, um, have been a major source of resilience for me and have been, I think, both an explanation for some of the pain that I carry, because I write in the book about how I start to discover that, this pain that I carry in my body has often felt bigger than myself. And I start to understand that I think some of it was my grandmother's pain, her grief from losing my grandfather, her grief from, probably a lot of things that I don't know about her story, growing up as a poor self-made woman who had to raise her own brothers as well, and so I think, it's both just that explanation that I might be carrying some of her pain and grief, and also just the knowledge that, like, hey, if she can make it through what she made it through in her life, I can make it through what I need to make it through in mine, and having that example of perseverance has been a real beacon for me.
Mm, mm. Well, and that is made very, very clear in the in the book. I enjoyed reading that. We are going to wind down in a minute or so, but I also wanted to talk to you about your trip to the Cordilleras.
Mm,
I know this happened, I guess, in the early 2000s.
yeah,
Um, and they
2002.
had I guess the annual. They have the whole big thing where you have the different indigenous groups. I was in Kalinga back in, God, like it's 2019 or 2018.
Oh, recently.
Took a trip. Yeah, I took a trip with Manila Town Heritage Foundation.
That's great.
We stayed at Manong Sapi Bauer's
Wow.
compound up there. So that was,
Amazing.
that was pretty beautiful. We were doing the film called the Al Robles Express. It was you know, the documentary. So
Oh,
so
I need
that
to
was
check that out.
that was a great experience. I wanted to ask you about that experience as it relates to, just your evolution with pain and how you've dealt with it, because there's that fear in that region that there's government that is going to come in, take over the dam, I mean take over the river. They want to dam up the river, and then there's always these companies that want to come in and extract the minerals from the earth. Can you just talk about the influence that's had? If you could talk about that, the influence that that's had on you, and then how you're dealing with pain at the present time.
Yes. So, one of the themes of interconnectedness, you had mentioned, talking about how the metaphor of waterways is really one of interconnectedness, and
Hmm.
that's absolutely 100% right on. And so one of the dimensions of interconnectedness that I was hoping to explore in that particular essay was interconnectedness, not just between people and bodies and human beings, but between us and nature and our ecosystems, and also, frankly, the spirit world, right? That particularly many indigenous communities, such as those in the Cordilleras, see as inseparable from nature and from themselves. And for me, when I went on that trip, I think it was really the first time that I got to actually physically experience that sense of interconnectedness. And at first I was like, whoa, that feels bizarre and strange. And I don't know about, all of this. This is too much togetherness for me. But
Hmm.
by the end of the trip, um, seeing and feeling that people would lay down their lives to keep the Chico River free. And the reason that they would do that is because they don't just believe, they know that that river is inseparable from their bodies and from themselves and from their being and way of life. It made me feel, number one, that my pain didn't have to just be contained in my own body, that it's something that actually nature helps me carry. And that kind of conversely, pain has a purpose, not just, when we're, maybe about to burn ourselves because there's, we're too close to the stove. But if we are connected to nature and nature is being exploited by multinational corporations, by governments, that maybe the pain has a purpose because of the pain that the land and the water is having to go through at the hands of these exploitative forces.
Mm.
So there's, it's again, both kind of somatic experience and an understanding that helped me realize that there can be a different way of relating to both nature and pain. And then on an individual level, honestly, it's been one of the most healing things to realize, actually, if I just go spend time in or around water as much as possible, it helps relieve my pain. It doesn't just
Mm.
make me like feel more peaceful. It can
Wow.
actually
Yeah.
literally reset my nervous system in ways that helps relieve my pain. But then on a larger societal level, that essay really asked the question of, what if the Cordillera people didn't have to fight so hard to maintain self-determination over their land, water, and resources? And more so than that, what if the Cordillera people and indigenous people across the world were actually, um, uh, given land back to steward so that our world could be reorganized
Mm.
back into that way of being of interdependence and interconnectedness that had been severed violently by Western imperialism.
Which goes back to what we had said earlier about the different types of exposition, the exposition of speculation. And you just
Mm,
hammered it on the head there. And I think, that goes hand in hand with the essay form, where you can kind of, get into these different things. Like you illustrate that in your book, the exposition of secrets, family secrets, particularly cultural secrets, right? Fall within that. Then you have high exposition, where you get into the history of how people were deemed as being hysterical and witches when they were really healers, and and the whole clinical thing behind it, the high exposition, those higher ideals. And then you also have the exposition of was it the high exposition, the exposition of speculation, exposition of secrets. It's all there in this wonderful book. Again, this is Jen Soriano, the author of Nervous. Again, these are essays, wonderful essays on heritage and healing. Jen, again, thank you so much for being on Listen and Be Heard. For people that want to know more about your book and find out what it is, what's going on, things that you're doing, they want to pick up the book. How can they do that? Best way they could do that.
the best thing to do is ask your local bookstore if they have it, and if they
Hmm.
don't, if they can order a copy for you or stock it, because that supports your independent bookstores and also supports authors in getting on the radars of independent bookstores. Um, but otherwise, you can also go to my website, which is jensoriano.net, and there's a way to order the book online there. And you could also connect with me on Instagram or TikTok at Jen Soriano Writes. And I love the whole point for me of writing is to connect with folks. So I love to talk to readers and other writers. And so if
Fantastic.
you,
In fact, I walked into a local bookstore today and I recommended Nervous to them. Again,
yes, thank you.
jensoriano.net. Again, Jen
Mhm.
Soriano, last name is spelled Soriano. jensoriano.net. Find her.
Mhm.
That's her website. And on Instagram, Jen Soriano Writes. Once again, Jen, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Best of luck
Tony, this
with
is
this
great.
book. I know that this book is going to get out and a lot more people are going to read it. It's going to be very, very helpful for folks that are dealing with pain, chronic pain, spiritual pain, pain of all types. Again, thank you so much. And again, this is Listen and Be Heard Radio. My name is Tony Robles, and we're going to toss it back to Martha in the studio.